Media violence and aggression. In the public debate on aggression and violence, media influences are blamed by many people for the apparently increasing levels of aggression, especially among children and adolescents. A cursory and occasional sampling is sufficient to convince the everyday observer that television programs are full of aggressive episodes, often of a highly violent nature, that are easily accessible even to young viewers. The same is true for movies, comic books, and, in particular, video games. In addition, surveys regularly show that children are exposed to violent media for substantial durations from an early age. These observations lead many people to believe that the portrayal of violence in the media affects the level of aggression in society. Some critics even argue that media consumption in general, irrespective of its aggressive content, contributes to aggression and antisocial behavior. At the same time, the claim that violent media content causes users to become more aggressive has been vigorously disputed, not only by users and the media industry, but also by some researchers in the field. The present chapter will review the current state of the debate on the link between media violence and aggression, whereby media violence is defined as showing or describing behavior by media characters intended to cause harm, especially severe physical harm, to others. The discussion is guided by the general proposition that the effects of media use on social behavior depend on the content of the media stimuli. As we saw in Chapter 2, observational learning plays a major role in the acquisition and persistence of aggressive behavior. For this process to happen, the observed behavior needs to be aggressive in nature. By the same process, media depicting pro-social behavior may be a source of the learning of pro-social behavior. Media violence. Media, movies, video games, music videos, etc., showing or describing behavior intended to cause harm, especially severe physical harm, to media characters. Media violence aggression link. Hypothesis that exposure to violent media content makes users more aggressive. An extensive literature, both in psychology and in media science, is available to address the link between media violence and aggression, focusing on television, movies, and video games as the most widely used media, but also including music, cartoons, and even texts from the Bible. A comprehensive review of this literature, organized in the form of frequently asked questions, is presented by Plant et al. 2020. The following summary is organized as follows. To begin with, some data are presented about the prevalence and forms of violence in today's media offers and about the extent to which violent media are used, especially by children and adolescents, who are seen as particularly vulnerable to media influences. We then address the general question of whether there is a causal link between exposure to media violence and aggression. After presenting examples of the predominant research strategies in the field, we focus on recent meta-analyses that bring together a large number of individual studies and provide the most robust evidence on the strength of the association between media violence and aggression. Based on this evidence, psychological processes explaining both short-term effects and long-term effects of exposure to violent media on aggressive thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are discussed. We then take a special look at the effects of pornography as a specific type of media content on aggression in general, and sexual aggression in particular. Finally, we present research on ways to prevent or mitigate the effects of media violence on aggression. It is important to note that the scientific debate about media-induced aggression is not based on the assumption of a simple monocausal relationship between media violence and aggression. Such an assumption would hold that exposure to media violence causes aggression regardless of other influences. Instead, it is recognized by most researchers that media violence is only one of many factors potentially leading to aggression. As will become clear in the course of our discussion, the effects of heavy use of violent media may be exacerbated by other causes of aggression, e.g., exposure to real-life violence within the family, or they may be attenuated, e.g. by teaching critical viewing skills. At the same time, heavy use of violent media may itself exacerbate the influence of other risk factors for aggressive behavior. Prevalence and use of violent media contents. There are two premises to the claim that media violence produces harmful effects on viewers. that violence and aggression are widely present in media programs, and that these contents are used extensively in different age groups. To address the first claim, content analyses have shown that violence features predominantly across a wide range of media. Analyzing data from the National Television Violence Study, Wilson et al. 2002, found that programs directed at children aged 12 years or younger contained more violence and showed more positive consequences of violence than programs produced for older audiences. In an analysis of 10 TV programs screened in the UK, Coyne et al. 2010 established that violent acts were committed at a rate of 42.5 acts per hour. Reality TV programs, such as Big Brother, contained substantially more violence, 61.5% of all violent acts counted, than non-reality programs, such as EastEnders. The most common form of aggression was verbal aggression, such as yelling, arguing, 38.39%, insulting, 30.60%, and name-calling, 9.31%. Analyzing 1,162 program hours on 10 German television channels during 2002 and 2003, Grimm et al. 2005 found that 58% of all programs contained at least one violent episode, and 33% of all violent interactions were presented as resulting from socially accepted motives. Violent content is also rife in movies and has increased over time. In an analysis of 855 best-selling films covering 57 years, 89% of films contained violence, and there was a steady increase of violence across the study period. Pointing out that direct physical violence is not the only form of aggression displayed in films, Coyne and Whitehead 2008 examined the prevalence of indirect aggression in 47 animated Disney films and found an average rate of more than 9 instances per hour. Indirect aggression was defined as social exclusion, e.g. malicious gossip, excluding others from the group, malicious humor, e.g. making gestures behind a person's back, playing practical jokes, guilt induction, e.g. exerting undue pressure and influencing others by making them feel guilty, and finally, indirect physical aggression, e.g. plotting and kidnapping. A content analysis of 23 best-selling animated cartoon movies for children in 2011 found an average rate of 54 acts of aggression per film. The most commonly depicted forms of aggressive behavior were punching, kicking, and slapping, which correspond to everyday forms of aggression in the children's behavioral repertoire. Content analyses of video games unanimously suggest that violent scenes are just as, or even more frequent in this medium as they are on TV and movies. A content analysis by Hanninger and Thompson, 2004, of 396 video games that were rated T for teens showed that 94% of them had violent content. An analysis of popular games in Germany also concluded that many games rated by the self-regulating body of the media industry as suitable for children and adolescents contained substantial levels of violence. Looking not only at the level of violence but also at the way it is presented in video games, Hartman et al. 2014 found that most games did not show the adverse consequences, provided a justification for the violent behavior, and dehumanized the targets of violence, for example by making them all look identical or not showing their faces. Finally, analyzing the popular medium of music videos, Smith and Boyson 2002 found an average rate of violent content of 15%. However, there was substantial variation by genre, with rap videos having a significantly higher percentage of violent acts, 29%, than rock, 12%, or rhythm and blues, 9% of videos. In addition, there is growing concern about misogynist and men-hating texts in music that are hallmarks of popular artists, sexism, such as Eminem and Christina Aguilera. Regarding the extent to which violent media are used, surveys show that the use of media is a prominent leisure activity for children and adolescents. With regard to violent movies, Worth et al. 2008 asked a random sample of over 6,000 adolescents in the U.S. aged 10 to 14 years whether they had seen titles on a list of 40 violent movies rated R for violence in the U.S. and 8able, suitable only for adults, in the UK. Across the 40 movies, The average rate of 10 to 14-year-olds who had seen them was 12.5%, but the percentage was substantially higher for a number of specific titles. For example, the horror film I Know What You Did Last Summer had been seen by 44% of the sample. Extrapolating from this figure to the population as a whole, the authors concluded that the movie had been seen by more than 9 million viewers under the age of 14 years, a million of whom would have been just 10 years of age. Arguably, video games are even more important as entertainment media. Even in the age group of 65 years or over, 23% report playing video games, and among adolescents and young adults, user rates are close to 100%. In a survey conducted in the U.S. in 2008, 97% of teenagers aged 12 to 17 years reported playing video games, 31% reported playing every day. In terms of the preferred game content, about a third of gaming teenagers reported that at least one of their 3 favorite games was rated mature, with boys outnumbering girls by 3 to 1 in this group. A representative survey of German adolescents aged 12 to 19 years found that Grand Theft Auto, which has an age rating of 18 years in Germany, featured in the top 3 favorite games from age 14 onwards. Another representative survey of more than 44,000 15-year-olds in Germany found that 55% of boys, compared with 9% of girls, reported playing games rated 16 plus several times a month, and 48% of boys, compared with 5.2% of girls, reported regularly playing games rated 18 plus. These figures need to be seen in the context of strict legal regulations in Germany that prohibit the sale of these games to minors. From the evidence reviewed in this section, 2 points have become clear. Violence is predominantly present across a range of different media, and violent content is widely consumed not only by adults but also by a younger, especially male audience. Against this background, we can now turn to the question of whether exposure to media violence really leads to increased aggression in viewers. How strong is the link between media violence and aggression? Research designs and examples. To explore the association between media violence use and aggression, 3 main methodologies have been used. Experimental studies that randomly assign participants to a violent media condition or a non-violent media condition, and then observe the short-term differences in aggressive behavior in the 2 groups. Cross-sectional studies relating self-reports of habitual violent media use to aggressive behavior measured through observation, peer nominations, or self-reports, typically controlling for other variables potentially related to media violence use and/or aggressive behavior, and longitudinal studies that follow the same group of participants over several measurements to relate media violence use at an earlier point in time to aggressive behavior measured later. The experimental approach is illustrated by research by Carnegie and Anderson, 2005, who explored the importance of reward and punishment of violent action in a video game for subsequent aggressive cognitions, affect, and behavior. All participants played a racing game, Carmageddon 2, but they were randomly assigned to 3 different conditions. A condition in which killing competitors and pedestrians was rewarded by giving extra points, a condition in which killing competitors and pedestrians was punished by deducting points, and a non-violent condition in which killing pedestrians or competitors was not possible. Blood pressure and pulse were recorded as measures of arousal to make sure that the 3 versions did not differ in terms of their arousal quality. State hostility after the 20-minute playing period was measured as an index of aggressive affect, Experiment 1. A word completion test presenting words that could be completed to yield either an aggressive or a non-aggressive meaning was used as a measure of aggressive cognition, Experiment 2, and the duration and intensity of noise blasts administered in a competitive reaction time task, see Chapter 1, were used to measure aggressive behavior, Experiment 3. The results are shown in Figure 6.1. For aggressive affect, the findings revealed that both groups engaging in violent actions in the video game experienced higher levels of state hostility than the group that could not engage in violent actions. For aggressive cognition and aggressive behavior, the participants in the reward group scored significantly higher than those in the punishment group and those in the nonviolent control group. The latter two groups did not differ significantly in either cognitions or behavior. The finding that violence rewarded by positive consequences promotes aggressive thoughts as well as aggressive behavior is consistent with social learning and sociocognitive theories of aggression. See Chapter 2. Beyond violence in films and video games, experimental research has examined violent lyrics in music as triggers of aggressive responses. In research by Fisher and Greitmeyer, 2006, men who were asked to listen to songs with lyrics that disparage women, e.g. Superman by Eminem, and Self-Esteem by The Offspring, recalled more negative attributes about women and behaved more aggressively towards a female experimenter than did men who listened to neutral lyrics. In a second study, women who had listened to songs with men-hating lyrics, e.g. You Oughta Know by Alanis Morissette and Can't Hold Us Down by Christina Aguilera, displayed more aggression towards a male Confederate. In a study of violent music videos, Lennings and Warburton, 2011, found that the lyrics alone, even when the visual channel was removed, increased aggression. As measured by the hot sauce paradigm, see Chapter 1, compared with a control group. Figure 6.1, Effects of Reward and Punishment of Violence in Video Games. So it's a bar graph, and for the first one, on the y-axis is state hostility from 1 to 5, and in each the three categories on the x-axis are violence rewarded, violence punished, or no violence. So for the first one, when violence is rewarded, the state hostility is the highest. When violence is punished, it's lower, but only slightly. And when there's no violence, the state hostility is low. For the second graph, they're measuring the aggressive words from 0 to 1. For aggressive cognition, proportion of aggressive word completions. And when violence is rewarded, it is the highest, 0.2. When violence is punished, it's still pretty close though, a bit lower. With no violence, it's about half as high as violence rewarded. And then when they're measuring noise from 0 to 200, the duration intensity of a noise blast, so they're measuring aggressive behavior. When violence is rewarded, it is actually much higher than when violence is punished, about 3 times higher. And violence punished and no violence are similarly low. So it does seem that when violence is rewarded, the aggressive behavior increases substantially. As an example of cross-sectional studies, Anderson et al. 2017 collected data on habitual use of violent screen media and self-reported aggression in the Bus-Perry Aggression Questionnaire, see Chapter 1, from a total of 2,154 adolescents and young adults from 7 countries: Australia, China, Croatia, Germany, Japan, Romania, and the US. In addition, they measured normative beliefs about aggression and empathy as potential mediators in the link between media violence use and aggression, and they included additional risk factors for aggression in 6 of the countries: abusive parenting, living in a violent neighborhood, being bullied by peers, and association with delinquent peers. The links between media violence use and aggression in the 7 countries are shown in Table 6.1. In all 7 countries, media violence use was significantly associated with aggressive behavior, even though the strength of the association was in the small range and varied between countries. Looking at the pathways in the data aggregated across countries, increased media violence use predicted aggression via a greater normative acceptance of aggressive behavior and lower empathy. When the additional risk factors were included in the analysis, media violence use not only remained a significant predictor, but turned out to be the second strongest predictor, beta equals 0.16, very similar to the association with delinquent peers, beta equals 0.17, but higher than abusive parenting and neighborhood crime, both beta equals 0.08. However, it needs to be noted that even when controlling for such additional variables, cross-sectional studies cannot determine the direction of causality in the association between violent media use and aggressive behavior. Table 6.1, Association between use of violent screen media and aggressive behavior in 7 nations, standardized regression coefficients. They're all about 0.16 to 0.35. In the US is the highest, 0.35. The lowest is Japan at 0.16.